Alright, hey guys, so today I'm going to be going over a quick video on how to interpret a 6-lead EKG or ECG or however you want to say it. They're both the same thing. So I know it's kind of tricky if you've never seen it before, and there's a couple tips and tricks that I use that makes it real easy to understand it and to give you a quick interpretation of what's going on with your patient. So first thing you have to understand when you're doing EKGs is it's a vector measurement. So we have to draw a vector. You got to go back to physics. So a vector is essentially just this arrow here that's proportional. So it's a measurement of the force and the direction of that force. So essentially the pointing or the arrow direction that it's pointing gives you the direction of the direction of the force, and the length of the arrow is proportional to the amount of force you're giving it. So if you have this vector here, that means we're pushing our force this way across the board. If we have another vector going this direction here, that means our force is going down, and it's around the same, probably about half of the force of this one, but they're completely perpendicular. So the other thing you have to use when you're doing EKGs is it's vector summation. So essentially we're going to add these two arrows together. So if you think about it, the way they like to do it, they teach you in physics, is you do head to tail addition. So we're just going to take this arrow here and we're going to slide it over and we're going to glue it on the end of that tail there. And this is going to be our new vector. So our new vector, if I can erase that, when we're adding this vector here and this vector here, it comes out to be this one here. So you're just splitting the difference between the two. Let's see. So that's essentially what we need to. This gives you a baseline of how you're going to understand EKGs and the way the heart's working. So the next thing you need to understand when we're doing EKGs is how the heart contracts, or how you get an action potential in the heart. So we all know what depolarization is in a muscle. When you depolarize it, you are becoming more positive, and you are going to trigger voltage-gated channels, whether you're in skeletal muscle or in cardiac muscle, and that's going to trigger an action potential. So what we need to first do is we need to draw a little heart diagram here. So up here, we'll say this is the SA node. Okay. And then we're going to have just as a crude drawing, okay. So this is our right atrium, left atrium. This would be your AV node. Okay, this is the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So remember, we know that the left ventricle is going to be bigger than the right ventricle. The walls are going to be bigger. Not necessarily the size, but I guess I could draw the walls in here. Because we're pumping more of a force against the systemic body pressure instead of pumping with the right ventricle into the lungs, which is just the pulmonary pressure. So we have to have more muscle to elicit that force. So when we're in the heart, the things we need to look at now when we were talking about the vectors is we need to find out the direction that the heart is depolarizing. So what direction, if we were to add up all the depolarizations in that heart, so if we add up all the areas where the heart's becoming more positive and eliciting a contraction, we need to find out what that direction is. So essentially, let me switch to a different color here. Essentially, in the heart, we have the depolarization starts here at the SA node, right? And then it comes down, it spreads through the left atrium and the right atrium, and it hits the AV node. And the AV node then sends a conduction impulse that goes down the septum through the Purkinje fibers up into the right and left ventricle. Sorry, I just got an email. Into the right ventricle, left ventricle, through the various conduction pathways, but we're not going to get into that now. So that's essentially the route. So if we look at the atria and how they depolarize, the net depolarization for the atria is this direction. Okay? So it's pointing more kind of towards our left shoulder, maybe left nipple, essentially. You could think about it that way. When we're looking at the ventricles are pointing their depolarization. It's bigger, right? Because we have more muscle tissue here. We're going to have a more positive response. So it's going to be pointing, our vector is going to be pointing to around our left hip, or our left foot, you could think of. So if we add these two together, we get an approximation of our net depolarizing vector for the heart is this middle one right here. Okay? So that is typically the direction that our heart should depolarize, in this direction. Which makes sense, right? Because it's going to go from up here in the atrias, and it's going to go down this direction into the heart. Okay, so now we know the net depolarization. We're going to erase this here. Now we need to talk about the Ekg form. Okay, so first off, and then we'll get into Einthoven's triangle, which is another thing that you have to understand. But after that, it's essentially it, and we can look at some EKGs and we'll interpret them together. So, what was I going to do? Oh yes, an EKG. Okay, so first thing in the EKG, we have our mean electrical axis, right? Then you have your P wave, Q, R, S, and a T wave. That's essentially it. So P, Q, R, S, T. Okay, you can have a bunch of variations in your QRS complex, is what this thing is called right here. But we won't get into that because that's you kind of getting pathological. But so, okay, essentially, the P wave is when our atria are depolarizing. Okay, so our SA node sends a depolarization down into the muscles. So from here until here is our depolarization in the atria. Okay, once we hit the AV node, that AV node is going to take that signal and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to send my electrical depolarization into the ventricles. So from this point here, at the beginning of the Q, to just after the S, is our depolarization of the ventricles. And that includes going down through the septum, Purkinje fibers, left branch, right branch, through all the bundles and everything like that, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, and then this T form right here, this is the ventricle repolarization. Okay? QRS is depolarizing the ventricle. P wave is depolarizing the atria. And then the T wave is the ventricle repolarization. That's what you got to know. All right. So now that we have that, and I'll let you guys can copy that down. You can pause it now if you need to and get that all copied. We're going to go over the Einthoven's triangle. Okay. So let me erase everything here. All right. So Einthoven's triangle. Einthoven was a scientist who essentially pioneered this subject, and it's essentially he developed a triangle. So we'll draw the heart here. He developed a triangle that allows us to view the heart and its electrical signals from multiple angles. And so I'll explain why that's important here in a second. But so we have the heart here, and if we remember, the net depolarization of the heart is this direction. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Let me switch markers again. All right, so this is where it comes into EKG reading. We have in a 6-lead EKG, you have your lead 1, 2, 3, and then you have your Avr, Avl, and Avf. All right? So this is where they get these letters from for your leads. So I'm going to erase this triangle here. Okay. So when we have the Einthoven's triangle, the way he's doing that is he's taking these 3 leads here. So lead 1 is, or these are all going to be looking in the frontal plane of your body. When you get into the your like V1, V2, V3, V4, and all that stuff, that's looking into your transverse plane. So these are just frontal planes. So when we look at lead 1, the electrode is placed. Let me draw the triangle. I'll just draw the electrodes here. Okay. So this is your left arm. This is your right arm, and this is your left foot. Okay. Those are the three coordinates that make up the triangle. So up here, when you look at the top, let me switch colors again. This distance here, this is lead 1, this is lead 2, and this is lead 3. Okay, but now you might think, well, where do I need to put positive and negatives into this situation? So the way you look at this here is the foot, the left foot, has both as positive. Okay, the right arm has both as negative, and the left arm has a positive and a negative. Okay. So essentially the electrodes go from, just like in a circuit, connect negative to positive, so this direction here. Okay, so lead 3 is that, lead 1 is this, and lead 2 is this. Okay, so this is what you know. This is Einthoven's triangle. I'm sure you guys have gone over it. So to interpret it, I'm going to draw this down here. So lead 2 is the most commonly used lead when you're doing EKG interpretation. And that reason is because the mean electrical axis, remember when we drew the heart down here, or in the middle here? The mean electrical axis and the average depolarization vector, the direction that the heart depolarizes or it becomes more positive, was this way, remember? So when we match and we look here, the net depolarization of the heart is almost the same direction as lead 2, right? So you might say, okay, well, that doesn't really make any sense. Well, this is why it makes sense. So when we look over, let's see, I can draw it over here. You can see that, yeah. So if we have a, let's just draw a crude, here's a vector, all right? And if we are measuring, let me apply it to the heart. It gets difficult to explain. Let's say I have a depolarization that's going, let me switch colors, a depolarization that's going to the right, all right? So this is our depolarization, so it's becoming more positive, right? Depolarizing, it's becoming more positive, less negative, and it's going to the right, all right? We're looking at this lead 1 here. This lead 1 is designed to measure and show you any depolarization that's going to the right, okay? So if you have a depolarization that's going to the right, you're going to have a positive spike on that lead. So if we're saying this is lead X, okay, and it's measuring depolarization, so you would have a positive spike on lead X's EKG, if you want to call it that, or on their voltmeter, because it's becoming more positive as it's approaching the positive side of that vector. The arrow always points to the positive side of the vector, okay? So now let's say if we change this and we have a repolarization, so we're becoming more negative this direction, okay? So we're getting more negative as we go to the left. How do you think lead X on the EKG would show? Would it be a positive or a negative? Well, lead X, since it's measuring, it wants to go towards the positive electrode or the positive side. It would show it's hard to explain. Essentially, as you're getting more negative and you're approaching the negative electrode, you're going to have a positive spike, okay? The way I think about it is the negative electrode likes to have people that are its own, its same polarity. So the negative electrode likes negatives to come towards it, okay? So if it has its own friends, so we'll say these guys are friends, if it has negative or charges coming towards it, it's going to be happy, so it's going to have a positive spike, okay? Now if we have, we'll say now if we have positive people, so these are other friends, these are positives, and they're coming towards the negative guy. Is he going to be happy or sad? Well, he's going to be sad because they're not his friends. So that's why you would have a negative spike in your EKG, okay? So, and the same thing can be applied to the positive side. If we have negative friends coming over to hang out with the positive guy over here, the positive guy doesn't really like to have negatives around him, so you're going to have, he's not going to be happy, he's going to be sad, so you get this negative spike, right? Same thing if we changed this and we had positives coming on over to visit the positive side of this electrode, you would have a positive spike because this guy's happy, okay? Because the positive side is where you're getting all your measurements from. So essentially, if you have a positive charge going towards the positive electrode, you get a positive spike. If you have a positive charge going towards the negative electrode, you get a negative spike. If you have a negative charge going towards the positive electrode, you have a negative spike. If you have a negative charge going towards the negative electrode, you have a positive spike. So it's essentially, if you're doing math, it's another way to look at it. If you have a positive, so 5 times 6, okay, 30. We have a positive number here and a positive number here. You add those two together, you get a positive number, right? If you have negative 5 times 6, you get negative 30, because a negative times a positive is always negative. If we have a negative 5 times a negative 6, we get positive 30, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So now just apply these numbers here, and if it's positive, you're going to have a positive spike. If it's negative, you're going to have a negative spike, right? That's essentially what they're doing. Okay, so go back here to Einthoven's triangle. All right, so in lead 1, we have the positive side over here, okay? So lead 1 is going to measure the direction of depolarization that's going to the left arm, all right? So any depolarization that goes this direction, it's going to have a positive spike, right? Because you're having a positive go towards a positive, okay? So if I have my depolarization, and we're looking in lead 1, if I have my depolarization going directly towards lead 1, just it's completely parallel with it, we're going to have a huge positive spike, right? Because his positive friends are going to see the positive electrode, and they're going straight there. They're not taking any detours or anything, all right? So now, if I have a depolarization that goes kind of this direction, so it's kind of halfway towards the positive electrode, kind of halfway perpendicular to it, right? We would have a smaller depolarization, okay? So it'd be like half of what it was, all right? So now, if I have my depolarization going completely perpendicular to that axis, okay, so we're going down, just straight down. Our electrical depolarization direction is going down, so it's not going towards the positive electrode, it's not going to the negative electrode. What do you think our spike is going to look like on our graph? It's going to be flat, or it's going to be completely biphasic. And biphasic means that if you add up, so if you measure the distance here, you measure the distance here, they equal 0. Okay, so it's just there's no difference in directions. Okay, so now think hard. What if my depolarization vector goes this direction, and we're looking in lead 1? All right, so we're getting more positive as we're approaching this way. What's our spike going to look like? Is it going to be positive, negative, or is it going to be equal? It's going to be negative, right? Why? Because we have the positive charges going more towards the negative electrode than the positive electrode, right? So the negative guy doesn't like to have positives come over, so he's going to be sad, so you're going to have a downward negative deflection, all right? Now if we completely change this and we have our depolarization going completely parallel with lead 1, it's just going opposite. So we're going directly away from the positive electrode and towards that negative electrode, depolarizing, so we're getting more positive. We're going to have a negative or a positive spike. It's going to be negative. How big is it going to be? It's going to be huge, right? Because our direction is going towards our positive charges are going towards the negative charge. He doesn't like to have those, so he's going to be really ticked off because you're having them go straight to him. Okay? They're not taking any detours. They're going straight to that negative electrode, and he doesn't like that. All right? So now what happens if we switch leads? So let's see if we measure from lead 2, all right? So the direction for lead 2 is this way, right? So we're measuring the depolarizing direction, this direction. The heart is here. Remember what the net depolarization direction for the heart was? Yeah, it was down, this direction. That's why lead 2 is the most commonly used lead, is because it's the most positive, because it's measuring the most, it's the closest measurement axis of the depolarization of the heart that you can get. It's just this direction, all right? So that's why it's positive, because we're depolarizing, so we're becoming more positive, going this direction, and this electrode here, lead 2, is pointing in the same direction, so they're almost parallel to each other, and they're both pointing towards that positive direction, right? So that's why you have a positive spike in lead 2, almost always, all right? So when you look at lead 3, what do you think? If we're in the heart and our net depolarization is this direction, what's our spike going to look like in lead 3? So remember, what's the direction? Are we going towards the positive electrode, or are we going towards the negative electrode? Yeah, we're not going to either of them. We're completely perpendicular. So we have a 90-degree angle here. So when you have a 90-degree angle, remember, you're not going to have a spike. It's going to be completely biphasic, or it's going to have no spike at all. So it's going to look like this. And it's going to be small. That's why lead 3 is typically very small when you're looking at your EKG, because the direction of depolarization is going not towards the positive electrode and not towards the negative electrode. It's just going completely perpendicular. Okay. Now note, all these directions I'm giving you are in a healthy person without any pathologies. All right. So those are leads 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to go over Avr, Avl, AVF. I had to erase everything because I was running out of room. It was getting way too messy. And it just gets more confusing if it's more messy. So Avr, Avl, and AVF are all combination leads. So they are not made by sticking electrodes on in specific places. They're made from the computer interpreting the differences between lead 1, lead 2, and lead 3. So remember, lead 1 pointed towards the left arm, right? Lead 2 pointing towards the left foot, and lead 3 pointed towards the left foot as well. So remember, this was positive and negative, and this was negative and negative, okay? I switched these around. This should be negative, and this should be positive, okay? So, because remember, we're going from lead 1 points from the negative part of the right arm to the positive part of the left arm. Lead 2 points from the negative part of the right arm to the positive part of the left foot, and lead 3 points from the negative part of the left arm to the positive part of the left foot, okay? So now when we do AVR, essentially the way you can remember this is, let's make sure you can see this okay. Yeah. AVR, the last letter in all these tells you essentially where the positive electrode is going to be, okay? So AVR, that means our positive electrode is going to be up here. Okay, and remember, this is all based on the computer interpreting it. So what the computer does is it says, okay, right arm, I'm going to have that be positive, and it's going to combine the left arm and the left foot. It's going to combine those, and that's going to be your negative, okay? So right there, positive, negative, okay? So AVR points towards the right arm, okay? So it goes from the negative side here to the positive side here. It is also perpendicular to lead 3. That's something important to note, okay? So let me switch colors again. So what do you think AVL is going to be then? If AVR combines left arm and left foot, what do you think AVL combines? Yeah, AVL combines right arm and the left foot. Like that. Puts the positive sign up here, and we just go and we connect the electrodes, okay? So the net direction of AVL points towards the left arm, and it is also completely perpendicular to lead 2, all right, which is important when we get into the EKG stuff, into the actual reading the rhythms. Okay, so AVF, what do you think AVF is? Last thing. So what are we combining? We're going to combine the right arm and the left arm, so that's going to be our negative, right? And then it's going to take the left foot. We'll go up here and we will connect the dots. So this is our positive. So AVF points straight down and is perpendicular to lead 1. All right? So AVR was perpendicular to what? How about AVL or AVF? So AVF is perpendicular to lead 1. AVL, perpendicular to lead 2. AVR is perpendicular to lead 3. Okay? Now, the reason why that's important is because remember when we're doing our vectors, when we're looking at those, so we have our vector arrow here, and the direction that we're measuring, that was a bad arrow, sorry. And we have our vector measurement. So we're measuring things pointing this direction. So remember, if we're perpendicular to it, our force or our spike on our electrical graph or on our EKG is going to be biphasic or 0, right? So if you have a, this is getting kind of advanced, but we'll get into this later. If you have a positive spike in lead 1, okay, so lead 1 has a real big positive spike. What do you think lead AVF would be? Is it going to be really, really positive? Is it going to be really, really negative? Or is it not going to have anything at all? So if lead 1 was really positive, that means our net direction is this direction, right? So our lead AVF is measuring this direction. Is this pointing more towards the negative side or more towards the positive side? Or not at all? Not at all. It's not pointing towards any of them. So you'd have a very small or nothing on that spike. Okay? Make sense? Good. It gets confusing, but that's just what it is, all right? So now we're going to combine all these up, and this is how you can tell your net direction of depolarization in the heart. So we said lead 1 goes left to right. Okay, so you draw your lead 1. Okay, 1. And this is the positive side. Okay, how about what's perpendicular to lead 1? There you can cheat and see. AVF. Okay, does it point towards the foot or towards the head? Points towards the foot. So the foot is positive. Okay, so we know those are perpendicular. What's the next one we should draw? How about let's do lead 2. Okay, so remember lead 2 was essentially this direction, right? So we'll draw lead 2. That's lead 2. How about AVR? Let's do AVR. Remember, AVR points towards the right arm, and the positive side is on the right arm. Okay, what's next then? How about lead 3? Remember, lead 3 goes in this direction. We're looking at our triangle. Here's 1, 2, and 3. Remember, lead 3 goes this direction, right? So here's lead 3. We're just superimposing everything together. Okay, then the last one we have is AVR, or AVL, right? So AVL points towards the left arm. And that's positive up here, okay? So you just got to imagine this is all perfect and neat and clean and everything. And you can find this graph on the internet a lot. Just search for Einthoven's triangle. Einthoven, I think is how it's spelled. It's a weird spelling, but so this is what you essentially have to understand when you're doing EKGs is this axis or this orientation, okay? So check out my next video that's going to start going over rhythms and how we're going to interpret the rhythms, okay? Let me know if you have any questions.